The Chambers family had always been the picture of success. They lived in a spacious home on the outskirts of a quiet suburban neighborhood, with a sprawling lawn and well-maintained gardens. To the outside world, they were a perfect family. Both parents had lucrative careers, and their two children, Oliver and Lily, were well-educated, attractive, and seemingly well-adjusted. The family seemed to embody the ideal American dream, but beneath the surface, there were cracks forming in the foundation, cracks that no one could see coming. Oliver, the eldest child at 25, had always been the golden boy. He was charismatic, intelligent, and full of charm, a natural leader who seemed to have everything figured out. He had gone to a prestigious college, graduated with honors, and quickly secured a respectable job in finance. He was known for his calm demeanor and his ability to make people feel comfortable around him. To everyone who knew him, he appeared to have it all, except for one thing. He was haunted by a deep, unspoken emptiness, a loneliness that he tried to bury with work and social events. Lily, on the other hand, was the artistic one. At 23, she had been a rising star in the art world, known for her intricate paintings that captured raw emotion and the complexities of the human soul. She had a quiet, introverted personality, which often made her seem distant and mysterious. Growing up, Lily had always looked up to her older brother, but there was an underlying tension between them that no one could fully understand. She was often the subject of Oliver's teasing, yet there was a bond between them that was undeniable, though no one could have imagined where that bond would eventually lead. Their relationship had always been one of the typical sibling rivalries and occasional squabbles, but over time, things began to shift. As Lily's artistic career faltered and she struggled with bouts of depression, Oliver became more involved in her life, offering guidance and support. He began spending more time with her, helping her with her art, and encouraging her to push through the dark periods she often found herself in. At first, this seemed like a natural progression, a concerned older brother looking out for his struggling sister. But as the months went by, their relationship began to take a different form. Lily's struggles deepened, and her emotional state became more erratic. She withdrew from her friends and social circles, choosing to spend more time with Oliver in the confines of their home. They would spend hours talking, alone in the large, quiet house. The lines between sibling love and something darker began to blur. It was subtle at first, a lingering touch, an extended embrace. But soon, those moments grew longer, more intimate. There was something about their connection that neither of them could shake. Oliver, who had always been the protector, started to see Lily in a way he never had before. She, in turn, became consumed by her dependency on him. It wasn't long before what began as a comforting emotional bond evolved into something far more complicated and sinister. They no longer just talked for hours. They began to rely on each other in a way that was unhealthy. Their closeness became a secret, something they kept hidden from the world, something they couldn't explain to anyone. As Lily's mental health continued to deteriorate, Oliver became her only lifeline, the one person who seemed to understand her in a way no one else could. They would go on long drives at night, away from prying eyes, their conversations growing increasingly intense and intimate. The world outside their small bubble seemed distant, irrelevant, as they spiraled deeper into their shared world of secrecy. The bond between them grew obsessive, and their feelings, once innocent and sibling-like, transformed into something darker, something that neither of them fully understood, but both were unable to break free from. Neither of them ever spoke of it directly, but the connection between them became undeniable. They both knew they were crossing lines, but neither could stop it They were caught in a web of emotions, guilt, and desire, all wrapped up in a complex and destructive relationship that they couldn't undo. As they continued down this dark path, the tension in the house began to rise. Their parents, though often busy with their careers, couldn't ignore the growing rift between their children. There were whispers behind closed doors, concerned glances exchanged over dinner, but no one dared to confront what was happening. The Chambers family, who had once seemed so perfect, was on the brink of collapse, their carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the weight of their unspoken secrets. The truth was lurking just beneath the surface, and soon it would be impossible to ignore. As the months went by, Lily's behavior became more erratic, and Oliver's involvement in her life grew deeper. Their once innocent sibling relationship had turned into something far more complicated, more dangerous. Lily's emotional state, which had always been fragile, was now teetering on the edge. She became withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone outside of Oliver. The art exhibitions she had once eagerly attended now seemed like distant memories. Her once vibrant paintings, filled with color and life, now appeared dark and chaotic, reflecting the turmoil that was consuming her from within. Oliver, though successful in his professional life, had begun to neglect his work. He spent his days focused on Lily, ensuring she was okay, checking on her constantly. His life revolved around her, and he convinced himself that he was doing the right thing by being there for her, even as their relationship began to shift into something unhealthy. Their bond had become an obsession, and despite knowing how wrong it was, Oliver couldn't bring himself to break away. Every time he tried to distance himself, he found himself pulled back to her, drawn into the vortex of guilt and desire that had taken over both of them. Lily's mental health continued to decline. She had long stopped attending therapy, and her once healthy coping mechanisms had fallen by the wayside. The isolation only fueled her feelings of abandonment and hopelessness. She would often have bouts of crying fits, locked in her room for hours, staring at the walls as if waiting for something to break her from the spell that had taken hold of her. She would barely eat, and when she did, it was as if she was going through the motions, lacking any joy in life. Oliver watched helplessly as his sister's mind seemed to unravel. He knew that their connection was becoming dangerous, but at the same time, he couldn't break free from the grip it had on him. They had both crossed an invisible line, and neither knew how to reverse it. It was no longer about comforting her or offering guidance. It had evolved into something far darker, something they both desperately tried to ignore but couldn't. The house, once a place of comfort and refuge, now felt like a prison. Tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Their parents, though often busy with their own lives, had started to notice the changes in their children. They were no longer the same people they once were. Their relationship seemed strained, and the warmth that had once filled the house had all but vanished. There were long silences at dinner, awkward exchanges during family gatherings, and a sense of unease that no one could shake. Lily's friends, who had once been a strong support system for her, grew concerned as well. They reached out, but Lily pushed them away. She grew defensive when anyone questioned her about her strange behavior, insisting that everything was fine. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. She was losing herself, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The more she tried to fight it, the more she fell into the chaos of her own mind, where nothing seemed real anymore. She was trapped in a world of her own making, and Oliver was the only one who understood. As the days passed, Lily became more unpredictable. She would have moments of clarity where she seemed almost normal, but they were fleeting. More often than not, she would be lost in her thoughts, staring into space or pacing through the house, unable to find peace. Oliver tried to comfort her, to reassure her that things would get better, but deep down, he knew that the bond between them had already crossed a line that could never be undone. The house grew colder, the distance between their parents and the children growing wider. There was a sense of impending doom in the air, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. It was as if everyone knew, but no one wanted to confront it. The Chambers family was falling apart, and there was no one to save them from the destruction they had brought upon themselves. As the days passed, the tension within the Chambers household became unbearable. Their parents, once the epitome of success and control, could no longer ignore the growing divide between their children. The warmth and joy that had once defined their home were replaced by an unsettling silence. There were moments when they tried to reach out to Oliver and Lily, but every attempt only seemed to highlight how deep the rift had grown. The siblings, once so close, were now distant, each lost in their own world, but bound together by something no one else could understand. It was Oliver's wife, Emma, who first began to notice the strange behavior between the siblings. She had been married to Oliver for 3 years, and while she had always been aware of the complicated dynamic between him and Lily, she had never thought much of it. At first, she chalked it up to the typical closeness between siblings, especially given their shared history and the years of emotional support that Oliver had offered Lily. But as the months went on, she could no longer deny that something was deeply wrong. It started with the small things. Emma noticed that Oliver would always choose to spend his time at home with Lily rather than with her. He would cancel plans, ignore messages, and brush off her concerns about their relationship. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to be in a constant state of distress. Her eyes were hollow, her body frail, and her art had become more disturbing than ever. Emma had always known that Lily struggled with depression, but this felt different. Darker, more consuming. One evening, Emma confronted Oliver. She asked him, gently at first, about his relationship with his sister. She could feel the tension in the room as soon as the words left her lips. Oliver, who had always been calm and collected, suddenly seemed defensive, almost agitated. He brushed her off, claiming that he was just trying to help Lily through a rough patch. But there was something in his tone that didn't sit right with her. Emma tried again, pushing him for more details, but Oliver grew increasingly irritable, snapping at her to mind her own business. It was then that Emma realized that this wasn't just a phase or a simple sibling bond. It was something much deeper and much more dangerous. Emma's suspicions only grew when she started to piece together what little information she could find. She began looking through old family photos and found one that stood out. Oliver and Lily standing close together, their eyes locked in a way that felt unsettling. The image had been taken years ago, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about it that didn't sit right. It was then that she noticed the subtle signs, the letters, the strange notes scattered around the house, the looks exchanged between Oliver and Lily when they thought no one was watching. Desperate for answers, Emma confided in a close friend, Sarah, who had known the Chambers family for years. Sarah, though initially shocked by the suggestion, slowly began to open up about things she had witnessed but never thought to question. There were moments when she, too, had noticed the strange behavior between the siblings, but she had dismissed it as a product of their complicated family dynamics. But now, with Emma's concern ringing in her ears, she couldn't ignore the red flags any longer. They spoke in hushed tones, both of them fearful of the consequences of their discovery. It was becoming clear that something was terribly wrong with Oliver and Lily's relationship. The way they looked at each other. The way they seemed to exist in their own private world. It wasn't normal. Emma knew she had to do something. She couldn't stay silent, not with the mounting evidence pointing toward something much darker than she had ever imagined. But she was terrified of what might happen if she confronted Oliver. She knew he would deny everything. But what if it was true? What if, like the whispers she had heard from Sarah and other family members, there was something more sinister going on beneath the surface? The days that followed were filled with anxiety and uncertainty. Emma tried to stay calm, keeping her distance from Oliver and Lily, but every time she walked into the room, she could feel the weight of their silence. The house had become a prison of sorts, with Emma trapped between the love she once had for her husband and the deep, gut-wrenching fear that something terrible was happening right under her nose. She began to wonder if she had been blind to the signs all along, too caught up in her own life to see the growing darkness consuming her family. It wasn't until she found a disturbing letter hidden in Lily's room that Emma's worst fears were confirmed. The letter, written by Lily herself, spoke of an intense, forbidden bond she had developed with Oliver. It was filled with longing and confusion, and it was clear that Lily had been struggling with her emotions for months, perhaps even years. The words on the paper were haunting, an admission of something no one should ever feel. Emma's hands shook as she read it, her heart sinking with each line. She had found the truth, but now she wasn't sure what to do with it. As the days passed, the weight of the letter in Emma's hands felt heavier than ever. She had read the words over and over, each time hoping that somehow she had misunderstood, that there had been some kind of mistake. But there was no mistaking the truth. The letter was a confession, raw and painful, written in Lily's own hand. It was clear now. There was no longer any doubt. Oliver and Lily had crossed a line that could never be undone, a line that no sibling should ever cross. Emma was paralyzed by a mix of disbelief and horror. How could this have happened? How could the man she married, the man she trusted with everything, have allowed such a twisted bond to form between him and his sister? She spent the following days in a state of shock. Every moment was filled with a nagging sense of dread and helplessness. She had never imagined anything like this could happen in her family, let alone in her own home. The idea that the man she loved was capable of such a thing seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The letter was just the beginning. Emma started noticing even more subtle signs that she had missed before. Disturbing looks exchanged between Oliver and Lily, long hours spent locked in rooms together, the uncomfortable tension that hung in the air when they were around each other. It was clear now that everything she had once known about her marriage, about her family, was a lie. Emma knew she had to confront Oliver. But how? She was terrified, not just of his response, but of what would happen once the truth came to light. The thought of breaking their family apart was unbearable, but what choice did she have? The guilt of living a lie, of ignoring the growing darkness in her own home, was slowly consuming her. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine, not when she had seen the truth in black and white. That evening, when Oliver came home from work, Emma made a decision. She would confront him. As soon as he walked through the door, she could see it, the tension in his eyes, the unease he carried. He knew something was off, but he didn't know how much Emma had discovered. She had been distant with him, avoiding his touch, avoiding eye contact. It had been impossible to hide her growing suspicion, and she could see that Oliver felt the shift. He tried to act normal, as if everything were fine, but Emma could feel the weight of his guilt bearing down on him. She couldn't keep up the charade any longer. Taking a deep breath, she handed him the letter. His face went pale as he read it, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to close in around them, the eyed silence deafening. Oliver's expression was unreadable, but Emma could see the shift in his eyes. He was caught, trapped in his own web of lies. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Oliver set the letter down and looked at her. His gaze was filled with a mixture of fear, shame, and anger. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but no. Words came. He seemed to be struggling, as if he didn't know where to begin. Emma, her heart pounding in her chest, demanded answers. She wanted to know how this had happened, why it had happened, and why he hadn't stopped it before it was too late. For the first time, Oliver seemed vulnerable. His carefully constructed facade began to crumble, and he finally admitted the truth. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he confessed how his bond with Lily had grown over time, how their emotional connection had deepened in ways that went beyond sibling love. He spoke of the isolation they both felt, of how they had both been searching for something to fill the void within themselves, something they couldn't find in the world around them. He told her that it had started innocently enough, with simple conversations late into the night. But as time went on, their emotional dependence on each other grew, and they both began to blur the lines between what was right and wrong. Oliver said that it was something they couldn't control, a force that seemed to have a mind of its own. He admitted that he had been terrified of the truth, terrified of facing what they had become, but he had never been able to break away. Emma, still reeling from his confession, didn't know how to respond. The man she thought she knew, the man she had married, was someone entirely different. She felt betrayed, not just by Oliver, but by the entire reality she had built around them. She had always thought their marriage was solid, that they were a team, but now everything seemed like a lie. Oliver's tears fell silently as he begged her for forgiveness. He didn't know what to do, what to say. His world had collapsed, and he could see the devastation in Emma's eyes. He tried to explain that he never meant for any of this to happen, that it had spiraled out of control, but Emma couldn't find it in herself to feel sorry for him. The damage had been done. As the night wore on, Emma realized that she couldn't stay in this twisted version of a family any longer. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too many. Oliver had destroyed everything they had built together, and no apology, no matter how heartfelt, could ever undo the damage. The weight of the truth hung over them, suffocating in its finality. Emma knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Emma's confrontation with Oliver felt like a blur, each one blending into the next in a haze of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Emma moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she had made. The house that had once been a home now felt like a prison, a place where memories of a life she no longer recognized haunted her at every turn. She couldn't bear to stay in the place that had been the backdrop to the darkest moments of her life. The truth had shattered everything, and she was left to pick up the pieces of a broken reality. Oliver's attempts to reach out were met with silence. He called, he texted, and he even showed up at her apartment, pleading for another chance. He claimed that he had made a terrible mistake, that he was going to get help, and that he was willing to do whatever it took to fix the damage he had done. But Emma was beyond the point of redemption. The man she had known, the man she had loved, was gone. What stood before her was a stranger, someone capable of unimaginable betrayal. She couldn't look at him anymore without seeing the darkness. That had consumed him. Lily, too, seemed to disappear into herself. Emma had expected to hear from her at some point, to get some sort of explanation or apology, but nothing came. Lily's absence in Emma's life was as profound as Oliver's. The young woman who had once been a talented artist, filled with promise and dreams, was now a ghost. She had abandoned her art, stopped attending therapy, and isolated herself even further. Emma wondered where Lily was, if she was safe, and if she even knew the full extent of what had happened. Did she understand the gravity of their actions? Or was she, too, lost in the same delusion that had led them both down this dark path? Months passed, and the story of the Chambers family's downfall began to spread. The whispers of their twisted bond reached the ears of neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives. Emma's decision to leave Oliver had sparked outrage in some, sympathy in others. She had become a woman scorned, the victim of a betrayal so profound that even the most compassionate couldn't fully understand the depth of her pain. People in her life offered their support, but there was always an air of discomfort surrounding the situation, a sense of awkwardness that no one could shake. As Emma tried to rebuild her life, the trauma of the past lingered. She threw herself into her work, finding solace in the distraction of her career. But even in her professional success, there was always a lingering emptiness. She had lost everything: her husband, her family, and her sense of security. The person she had been before this nightmare felt like a distant memory. Emma had changed, and there was no going back to the life she once knew. Meanwhile, Oliver had spiraled. Without Emma, without anyone to anchor him, he fell deeper into his own guilt and self-doubt. His career, once thriving, began to unravel. His clients, his colleagues, and his friends all distanced themselves from him, unable or unwilling to associate with the man who had destroyed his own family. His relationship with Lily, though still strong in some ways, became more toxic by the day. They were both trapped in a cycle of shame and dependency, unable to break free from the pull of the past. The final chapter of the Chambers family's tragic tale unfolded one fateful night, when Lily was found dead under suspicious circumstances. The news hit the community like a storm. At first it was unclear what had happened. Some speculated that she had taken her own life, consumed by the weight of her actions, while others believed it was an accident. But as the investigation unfolded, the truth became more chilling. Lily had been murdered, her life snuffed out in an instant. The person responsible was none other than Oliver. The police investigation revealed that Lily had confronted Oliver about their past, demanding answers about the relationship they had shared. She was desperate to escape the emotional and psychological torment she had lived through for so long. But in the heat of the moment, something snapped inside Oliver. The rage, the guilt, and the confusion of it all culminated in a fatal act. He had tried to silence her, to stop her from exposing the truth of their bond. The crime scene was a chilling testament to the chaos that had taken over Oliver's mind. In the aftermath of Lily's death, Oliver was arrested and charged with her murder. The trial was a media sensation, the final act in the tragic story of the Chambers family. Emma, though devastated by the loss of her sister-in-law, could not bring herself to feel sympathy for Oliver. The man who had once been her husband was now a cold-blooded murderer, incapable of understanding the horror he had caused. As Emma sat through the trial, she reflected on the life she had lost, the man she had loved, the family she had once dreamed of were all gone. And yet, as the gavel fell and Oliver was sentenced to life in prison, Emma felt a strange sense of finality. It was over. The story of the Chambers family had reached its tragic end, and there was no going back. But in the quiet aftermath, Emma knew one thing for certain. She would never allow herself to be consumed by the darkness that had destroyed her family. She had learned the hard way that some bonds could never be repaired, no matter how much one tried. And though the scars would remain, she was determined to move forward, to rebuild her life, and to never forget the lessons she had learned in the ashes of her shattered past.